A black liberal journalist openly mocks Barron Trump in public. But what happens next stuns everyone into silence. His brilliant response is something you have to see to believe. The ballroom of the Fairmont Grand Hotel glittered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, their light casting a warm shimmer over the sea of elegantly dressed guests. Conversations flowed in hushed, refined tones, punctuated by the occasional clink of champagne glasses. This was no ordinary gathering. It was the city's most anticipated charity gala, a night where power, influence, and philanthropy intertwined. Among the crowd were business moguls, Hollywood elites, and prominent journalists, all mingling in effortless sophistication. Yet despite the grandeur of the evening, an undercurrent of anticipation ran through the room. The air buzzed with expectation as the night's keynote speaker, a journalist known for their sharp tongue and unapologetic wit, was set to take the stage. Tucked away toward the back, in a quiet corner far from the spotlight, sat Barron Trump. At just 18, his presence was understated yet impossible to ignore. His tall frame and composed demeanor made him stand out, though he made no effort to seek attention. Invited by a family friend, he was here not as a headline or a statement, but simply as an observer. While others basked in the limelight, he remained still, his piercing blue eyes calmly surveying the room. For now, the gala unfolded as expected. Live music from a string quartet, the soft hum of polite laughter, and waiters gliding through the space with trays of delicate hors d'oeuvres. But beneath the polished veneer of the evening, no one could predict what was about to unfold. Because before the night was over, Barron Trump, without seeking it, would find himself at the center of a moment that no one in that room would ever forget. The atmosphere inside the Fairmont Grand Hotel was nothing short of mesmerizing. The grand ballroom, adorned with shimmering crystal chandeliers, cast a warm golden glow over the sea of elegantly dressed guests. Conversations hummed through the air like a well-orchestrated symphony, punctuated by the clinking of crystal glasses and soft ripples of laughter. This was no ordinary evening. It was the highly anticipated annual charity gala, an event that drew together some of the most powerful figures in the country. Business magnates, Hollywood elites, and influential journalists had all gathered under one opulent roof to support a foundation dedicated to helping underprivileged youth. Amid the sea of familiar faces, seated toward the back in a discreet yet unmissable corner, was Barron Trump. At just 18, his towering frame and composed demeanor made him stand out, though not by choice. Unlike the many guests who flourished in the limelight, Barron seemed more content observing from the shadows. He had been invited by a close family friend, a gesture meant to introduce him to a different social circle, one that operated outside the towering walls of his family name. Dressed in a tailored black suit that accentuated his height and presence, Barron remained calm, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room with quiet curiosity. If he felt out of place, he did not show it. And as the night progressed, the event followed a seamless rhythm. A string quartet played a delicate melody in the background, weaving an air of sophistication into the evening. Waitstaff glided effortlessly across the room, serving an array of delicate hors d'oeuvres and glasses of champagne that sparkled under the grand chandeliers. Laughter and polite conversation filled the space, but beneath the lightheartedness, there was an undercurrent of anticipation. The evening's keynote speaker was about to take the stage, and all eyes would soon turn toward the spotlight. The speaker was no stranger to controversy. A well-known journalist, infamous for their sharp tongue and unapologetic opinions, had been announced weeks earlier as the gala's headlining act. Their reputation preceded them. Some admired their fearless approach to commentary, while others found their rhetoric inflammatory. Either way, they were an undeniable force in the media world. As the MC introduced the journalist, the chatter in the room softened, glasses were set down, and heads turned toward the stage. Even Barron, who had remained largely indifferent throughout the evening, shifted slightly in his chair, his expression unreadable. The journalist strode onto the stage with practiced confidence, a sleek black suit complementing their polished demeanor. The audience responded with polite applause, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air. Would tonight be another one of their infamous, boundary-pushing performances? The speech began with ease, a lighthearted anecdote about the city's notorious traffic, a humorous nod to a past gala mishap involving a champagne tower collapse. Laughter trickled through the crowd, momentarily easing the tension. But as the speech progressed, the tone began to shift. What started as general political and cultural commentary soon veered into sharper, more pointed territory. The journalist made jabs at well-known political figures, drawing scattered chuckles from some, while others exchanged tight-lipped smiles. Then, inevitably, the subject turned to Donald Trump. Well, we can't talk about the state of the world without mentioning the man who made orange the new black, the journalist quipped, eliciting a mixture of laughter and uneasy glances. Love him or hate him, you have to admit, he's the gift that keeps on giving for people like me. Some in the audience laughed openly, while others merely sipped their drinks, choosing silence over reaction. Barron, seated quietly at his table, did not so much as blink. If the journalist was aware of his presence, they didn't acknowledge it. Not yet. The jokes continued, each one cutting deeper than the last. Trump's policies, his social media presence, his public persona, nothing was off limits. The laughter in the room began to dwindle, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, others exchanged wary glances. But the journalist wasn't finished. And of course, they continued, pausing for dramatic effect. We can't forget his most overlooked legacy, the next generation. I mean, let's talk about Barron. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Heads turned in unison toward the young man who had, until now, remained an unnoticed observer. All at once, Barron became the focal point of an audience that had not expected him to be pulled into the spotlight. The journalists, perhaps sensing the gravity of what they had just initiated, kept their tone playful, as if trying to cushion the sting of their words. Imagine growing up in a golden tower, surrounded by marble everything, while your dad tweets about Kofufe, and the rest of us are just trying to survive Monday mornings. That must have been character building. A smattering of nervous chuckles broke the silence, but they quickly died down. For the first time that evening, the journalists seemed to realize they had crossed a line. Barron, the subject of their jest, had not reacted. Not with laughter, not with anger, not with even the slightest flicker of emotion. He simply sat there, composed, calm, unreadable. The moment stretched uncomfortably. The once lively ballroom was now eerily quiet, the weight of the words hanging in the air like an invisible force. The journalist hesitated, perhaps expecting some kind of response, a smirk, a roll of the eyes, a dismissive shake of the head, anything. But Barron remained still, his hands lightly resting on the table, his expression unchanging. The silence was deafening. It was not the reaction anyone had expected. It was something far more powerful. The journalists, for all their bravado, seemed to falter ever so slightly, their once confident smirk wavering at the edges. Barron's silence was not indifference. It was a statement, and as the room sat in stunned anticipation, it became clear that whatever happened next would be remembered long after the night was over. As Barron Trump stood at the edge of the stage, the room remained locked in stunned silence. He was no longer just the son of a former president, no longer just an 18-year-old young man caught in the glare of public scrutiny. He was something more now. He had seized the moment, bent it to his will, and now all eyes were on him. Not out of obligation, but out of genuine intrigue, even respect. He let the silence stretch, his piercing blue gaze holding the journalist's eyes like a vice. The moment felt suspended in time, the weight of it pressing down on everyone in the ballroom. Then finally he spoke. "I appreciate your attempt at humor," Barron said, his voice measured, his tone carrying the unmistakable edge of someone who had spent a lifetime observing the world dissect his family. Comedy, after all, is an art form, one that requires not just wit, but an understanding of timing and, more importantly, boundaries. The journalist shifted uneasily behind the podium. The smirk that had once graced their face had disappeared entirely. The audience, once buzzing with whispers and secondhand embarrassment, was now utterly enraptured. "You see," Barron continued, stepping forward with the quiet confidence of someone who knew he had control of the room, "what you did tonight wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about my father either. It was about the way we, as a society, have allowed mockery to masquerade as discourse. We've allowed the easy laugh to replace real conversation. And for what? For a fleeting moment of superiority? For applause that fades before the night is even over? His words were sharp, precise, landing like blows in the dead air of the ballroom. The journalist's hands gripped the podium now, knuckles white, but they said nothing. Perhaps they knew there was no witty retort that could match the quiet authority with which Barron spoke. In this world, power isn't just about the loudest voice in the room, Barron continued, his eyes scanning the audience. It's about knowing when to speak and when to listen. It's about understanding that real strength comes from restraint, from dignity, from knowing exactly who you are, even when others try to define you. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some of the attendees, men and women who had built legacies of their own, nodded it in appreciation. It was clear they weren't just watching a young man defend himself. They were witnessing the emergence of a leader. Barron turned back to the journalist, his expression unreadable. "You expected me to react, didn't you?" he asked, his tone almost amused. "You wanted a scene, you wanted me to lash out, to stumble over my words, to prove whatever narrative you have constructed in your mind. And yet, here we are." The journalist swallowed, their carefully crafted confidence crumbling under the weight of the moment. Barron took one last step forward, closing the distance between them. "Words have power," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less intense. "You, of all people, should know that. So tell me, what exactly did you hope to achieve tonight?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine. The journalist left without an answer. The room, once filled with hushed anticipation, now crackled with something else entirely: admiration. Barron let the silence linger before offering a small, almost imperceptible smile. He turned then, walking back to his seat with the same effortless composure he had maintained throughout the ordeal. And as he sat down, the applause began. Not hesitant, not forced, this was something real, something earned. It started in small waves, then grew, rising like a tide until the entire ballroom was on its feet, giving a standing ovation to the young man who had, in the span of mere minutes, commanded more respect than most could in a lifetime. Barron didn't bask in it. He simply acknowledged it with the nod, his expression calm, unshaken. The journalist, still standing at the podium, looked out at the sea of people who had once been their audience. Now they were Barron's. The night had started as theirs, but it ended with one undeniable truth. The young man they had underestimated had just become unforgettable. As Barron returned to his seat, the standing ovation still echoing through the grand ballroom, the weight of the moment settled over the audience. What had started as a sharp quip from a seasoned journalist had transformed into something far greater. A moment of reckoning, of reflection, of raw humanity laid bare for all to witness. But the night was not over yet. The journalists, still standing at the podium, shifted uncomfortably. Their confidence, once unshakable, now wavered under the weight of Barron's composed yet cutting response. The audience's gaze had turned from admiration for the journalist's wit to something more critical, more expectant. And for the first time in a long time, they were at a loss for words. Barron, however, was not. Just as the applause began to subside, he rose from his seat once more, his movement smooth and deliberate. The room, still electric with energy, fell into an uneasy silence, all eyes snapping back to him. He turned, his piercing gaze meeting the journalist's. "You spoke about legacy," Barron said, his voice crisp and measured, carrying easily across the hall. "Let me tell you what legacy means to me." He stepped on forward, his presence commanding. The weight of his words hung in the air, steady and assured. A legacy isn't built on cheap shots or clever insults. It's not defined by the loudest voice in the room or by the number of laughs it can force from a crowd, he continued. A true legacy is built on character, on what you stand for when no one is watching, on the strength to rise above when others choose to drag down. The journalists swallowed, their posture stiffening. This was not the reaction they had anticipated. Barron's gaze didn't waver. "And I won't apologize for standing tall in the face of ridicule, because the truth is, I've been tested before. I've had my name turned into a headline, my family turned into entertainment. And through it all, I've learned that dignity isn't something you beg for. It's something you carry." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others sat frozen, captivated by the sheer presence of the young man before them. "I'm not here to ask for your approval," Barron continued, his tone sharper now, edged with conviction. "I'm here to remind you and everyone listening that power isn't about tearing others down. Real power is restraint. It's knowing you could destroy someone with a word, but choosing instead to show them the mirror and let them destroy themselves." A sharp intake of breath came from somewhere in the audience. The journalist's fingers tightened around the edges of the podium. For all their years of debate, of wit, of mastery over words, they had nothing to counter with. Barron exhaled slowly, then took a step back, scanning the room one final time before delivering his parting words. "So next time you stand on a stage," he said, his voice low but powerful, "ask yourself what kind of legacy you want to leave behind. One of substance or one of sound bites? Because after the laughter fades, after the headlines move on, what remains is not what you said about others, but what others remember about you." He turned and strode back to his seat, his expression unreadable, his presence leaving a gravity in the air that no joke, no quip could shake. The silence that followed was deafening. And then, the ballroom erupted, not in hesitant applause, not in scattered approval, but in something far more powerful. A standing ovation that carried the weight of respect, of acknowledgement, of the kind of rare admiration reserved for those who had spoken a truth too profound to ignore. The journalist, now overshadowed, offered a weak smile, their hands gripping the podium as they struggled to compose themselves. But the night no longer belonged to them. It belonged to Barron Trump. By the next morning, the moment had transcended the ballroom, spreading like wildfire across social media, news channels, and talk shows. Some called it a masterclass in composure, a defining moment of character. Others struggled to reconcile the image they had of Barron Trump with the young man who had stood unwavering in the face of public scrutiny and turned the narrative on its head. And yet, as the world debated, dissected, and discussed, Barron himself moved on. No victory lap, no self-congratulations. Just the quiet certainty of a man who had faced the fire and walked through it unscathed. His legacy had just begun.